So what is ACID? Transactions in a database should be ACID. They should be atomic, consistent, isolated, and durable, which means that if you put something into a database, you only put it once, the database is consistent, and if it fails, you can roll it back. So if you insert a number of rows, that's going to be a transaction, and databases should treat that as a unit, i.e., you either insert everything or you don't insert anything if you fail. This is to prevent, imagine if you're adding records into your CRM database, number of users who registered in the last week per channel. And imagine the transactions aren't atomic. That means that if something happens during the transaction and it fails, you don't know what failed. You then need to go back into the database and see, okay, which users got added, which users didn't get added, what the hell happened? In this case, it makes sense to make them atomic. If you fail, you know that nothing got added, period. You need to re-add everything. Consistency, you can never put the database in an inconsistent or an illegal state. For instance, if you have primary keys or you have a constraint that says that there's a uniqueness for a specific ID and that transaction occurs and there would be a duplication of the same ID, you're not allowed to do that. The transaction will fail because you are going to be putting the database into an inconsistent state. And given the nature of Atomicity, if you're adding 10 records, only one of them is going to put the database in an inconsistent state. The other 9 are correct, but the transaction will fail because, again, you can't put the database in an inconsistent state. And due to the atomicity, all 10 will fail. Isolation is the reason why database tables will lock. So essentially, you don't want two transactions to occur at the same time. So imagine you have a transaction that adds users and you have a transaction that removes users, and the one that removes users is counting on the first one to complete. If they both happen at the same time, you don't have any guarantees that you're gonna end with the correct data at the end of the operations. So isolation will basically means usually what happens in a database is someone's inserting, it will lock the table because that means it will lock the state for that transaction. It will execute that transaction, and only after it executes that transaction, gonna unlock and do the second transaction or third. This means you can preserve the consistency and then durability. If the database crashes, the data will still go there after, as long as a transaction was fully committed. And this is basically ACID.